Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLRS Rugby podcast, where all this week our attention focuses on the provinces with the return of our yearly series, URC Fanview. Tonight, we look at Ulster. It was a rollercoaster season and then some with coaching changes, CEO changes, player disruption, weird signings, decent rugby, bad rugby. Pretty much every box has been ticked, even a kit manufacturer change as well while we're at it. With me to look back on a eventful season at large are friends of the pod and fans of Ulster Rugby, Peter Lockhart and Adam Latham. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Cheers, thanks for having
Thanks,
me on.
Keelan. Yeah, great to be here.
It's always good to have you on, lads. And I'm gonna extend the olive branch before things get sticky, and I'm just gonna get general thoughts and be like really nice to you. So, Peter, Ulster season as a whole, what have you had of it?
Yeah, so it's difficult to sum up the season because I started off the season. It was the first season I haven't actually got a season ticket in years and years. I've been to every home game since I was about five, and then this season was the first one I just went, no, I'm not taking any part in this. Saying that, we've covered it extensively on my own podcast and watched every game and support the team, of course I do, but I thought that was my sort of moral stand against the way things were being run. So I didn't go to the games for various reasons, in fairness, but obviously followed it very closely. And we'll come to this in terms of the early results. We sort of scraped a number of wins. The performances weren't great, but in terms of the sort of roller coaster that we've had of a season, uh, it it started off fairly flat, I would say. That sort of stage of the roller coaster where you're sort of trundling along, and it's okay. And I think the jury was out at that stage, whether we would kick on at some stage, whether we'd click, and it didn't really happen. A spoiler alert, didn't really happen for most of the season. And then, of course, like in terms of the turning point that really came after Dan left, after McFarland was given the sack. And I think it didn't happen immediately, of course. So we went through a tough tour to South Africa. It's always a tough place to go, and a bit of a baptism of fire for him. And look, I think there was a general positivity around the squad at that stage. There was a sense that there was a bit of a clean slate, would be a good bonding experience, is how we framed it, rather than necessarily seeking to get a result out there. And certainly it seems to have worked. It was actually quite a nice way to kick off your tenure as Ulster coach by going away with the lads, spending extended time together as a squad out there, traveling about and getting to know each other again, and particularly for Richie, to get to know the guys and scope out sort of who he was going to base the team around. And then, of course, we've seen, and we'll go into all this in more detail in a few moments, I'm sure, but we've seen this sort of turnaround in terms of the vibe, the positivity, the confidence that the team have played with. And look, the season didn't end particularly well. Uh, in terms of outcomes and results, but I don't think anyone was really expecting. Well, I say that I was secretly expecting Ulster to do Leinster at their place. Now, it didn't happen, but I didn't publicise that too broadly because I knew it might come back.
By the time this gets out, people will have long forgotten about this game. So that's the one advantage of it for you.
I know, thank goodness. But look, even that game, I think we battled very well, and there's no shame in losing to Leinster in that manner. Put up a really good fight, and look, at the end of the day, and we'll come to talk about sort of next steps for Ulster, but I think tentatively, I'm being very positive about the changes that we've seen. In terms of, I think that's been my positivity is tempered somewhat by the number of departures in key positions. Saying that, it does give some new guys an opportunity, and we talk about this phrase quite a lot: crisis-tunity, stolen from The Simpsons. I think Homer came up with that phrase. A crisis, when a crisis meets an opportunity. We've had injury crisis. We've had guys announcing that they're leaving, and we've seen guys step up to the mark since that. Even the likes of Scott Wilson, we had real issues at tight head, and but for that, we wouldn't have seen the emergence of Scott Wilson, who's been a revelation for us at tight head, and I genuinely believe he'll add to Ireland's tight head stocks before too long. We've seen Cormac Izuchukwu come into his own. He's been a revelation as well in his new position, and I think we've seen some guys brought back in from the wilderness as well, and increasingly we'll see that as well. Even the likes of we haven't seen a huge amounts of Marcus Ray, guys like that. Um, but I would like to see him brought into the fold. Sean Rathball, again, could be like a new signing for us if he could remain fit for more than a couple of weeks. But no, very hopeful about those guys. And as I say, like rather, it's worked out quite well for Ulster because it was such a disaster at the start of the season. It necessitated change from the IRFU. I think if we I sometimes think that, and thinking of sort of favorite football teams here, I'm a Man United fan. Sometimes you have this weird feeling of wanting to lose a particular game because it will get rid of a manager. I'm sure we can all relate to that. And I got that sense with McFarland. I was like the writing was on the wall for so long. And McFarland, by all accounts, is a great technical coach, but like all the rumblings and the guys I've spoken to who are close to Ulster Rugby give me enough information to know that the atmosphere is fairly toxic and what we really needed was change. So this has been the season of change for Ulster Rugby. Positive change. We've made a start. That will take time. And again, we'll come to talk about that a wee bit more, but Rome wasn't built in a day, but you can only start, we are where we are, and you have to start somewhere. And this is a bit of a clean slate. So in summary, a season of change, a clean slate, and more excited for next season than I have been in the past few seasons, to be honest. So like I want to finish my wee summary on that positive note.
Well, it will probably start and end things on positives in terms of the outlay of the land. But Adam, I want to get your take. One podcast has described you as one of the most positive Ulster fans around, so I assume you're going to take up the mantle here as well.
Well, yeah, I'm like I fully agree with Peter. I think this feels like a much different because we had a couple of seasons ago where we had turmoil at the Shane Logan, Les Kiss era of things, and that felt like there was no going back, because we replaced them with the eventual ones that have left this season. This certainly feels different. I'm sure, Peter, would you say it feels a lot more positive and a lot more like less forced? Because the IRFU have actually stepped in and have helped out us a lot, really. Yeah, there's like the start of the season was weird. Certainly that Zebra result at the very start of the season, I remember being an odd one, having like shipped 36 points against them, but still winning by 40. There's like loads of weird moments in the season, like beating Racing, after getting thumped by Bath, and then getting thumped by well, not thumped by Edinburgh, but getting beat by Edinburgh at Kingspan. There's like so many odd wee moments of the season, like the Connacht game as well. I was at the Connacht game in December and beating them by 1 point. We just never really looked comfortable. I mentioned this on the Summit podcast we did a couple of days ago about how Henderson mentioned about the Leinster game away in Dublin being like not like an excited mood as it was in Belfast when they beat them, and how it was just sort of like a mellow, like sort of like not like a positive environment at all. As Peter said, there wasn't any sort of positive era in that camp. And then our European like season's been completely one to forget. There's just been, I thought getting into the Challenge Cup would have been like you know, let's try for it, let's go for it. And certainly when Richie came in, he's been kind of being dealt this sort of here you go, try and win this straight away, right after a tour to South Africa. So as Peter said, there's like a lot of comings, a lot of goings. We need sort of a season, a relaxed season next season, but hopefully with all the things going on in the background, that's starting to sort itself out, and all the financial troubles have seemed to completely relax itself. Certainly paying Kitsoff's wage doesn't really help, I can imagine, in a financial situation that we were in. Because I believe that we were going to probably lose like Eric O'Sullivan, for example, if we kept on Kitsoff. we're going to lose like a few more players onto that 9 that are already leaving. So there's way more positives than there are negatives, even though the very middle of the season and the start of the season, it just felt like there was um, never ending sort of like I would say pain, like emotional pain, just to go with Ulster rugby, which is the normality, but it just felt different. It felt like there was no sort of getting out of it. Our Ireland's squad like actual intake, like how many Ulster players that were in Ireland were like an all-time low. We had the Six Nations where there was only like one. I think Ian Henderson was on the bench for one game. There's stuff like that we need to like hopefully we'll get sorted out with the emergence of Cormac and also McCann as well, having an absolute storm of a season. Because even when the sort of shit hit the fan, that McCann always had a consistent game. He always played with his heart on his sleeve, and he seems to be the one, in my opinion, to take up a leadership role in the future. He's really much plays his heart on his sleeve, and he is a driving force for Ulster. And I
Easy to
feel
forget he spent the guts of 2 months out injured as well this season.
exactly.
Like,
It was noticed as well when he wasn't on the pitch. It was noticed. Not to say that like our back rows at the minute are like vast, and we actually have quite a lot of back rows for like comparing it to other seasons where we have like Raffle who will be a new season when he comes back, but I just hope that he doesn't have that sort of almost like when we signed like Addison, for example, and Marcel, where they just got injured all the time, and every time they came back they played a couple of games, five good games, then they come back for their last season, eventually play a couple of really really good games, and then just go back home, and it's like it's the ones that got away. But we really have to like I think it's very positive for next year, and I'm really excited to see how we deal with certain aspects. I'm sure we're gonna get on to like fly halves and stuff like that. I'm just excited to see how our game transforms, because Richie's playing a really nice brand of rugby, and it's really refreshing, because in the last couple of seasons we relied very much on the maul try, and you had the likes of Balakoon, uh, Jacob Stockdale, etc., just being lost completely in the shuffle. And now you're starting to see Stockdale play with a smile on his face. He scored, I think, 9 tries this season. That we're really unleashing the backline again, and it's unlucky that James Hume got injured at the end of the season, because see a preseason with Richie going into next season, we will have a really nice looking backline. And I'm sure we're going to get on to Cock next year, but I can see him sort of filling in that Addison role. The way that Addison's playing towards the end of the season, I'd say that he'll seamlessly transition into Werner Cock. Yeah, and that signing's made a lot more sense now, but it had to take an injury for it to make sense, which is annoying.
yes, it's not exactly the frame you want to put your signings on. It's like, oh, we got a lad injured, so now it looks okay, but
Yeah.
it will end up playing out that way. We'll try and speed our way through the season in some regard, because the way we're going to do it for all these episodes, we're going to break it into chunks, and we'll start with the early season, the first kind of block of URC games for Ulster. And to be fair, it was a decent start, like 4 wins in their first 5 games. On paper, really good start, Adam, but it wasn't the most impressive. And you think of that Zebra game in the opening day, and they were very lucky to win that one, for
Yeah.
instance, and that kind of trend continued. And I suppose the benefit of hindsight, you might say, well, they won the games, but at the time there were question marks, wasn't there?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of if you play crap and still win, you're a very good team. But there was no sort of cohesion. Our defense was like it was dreadful. Like there was no sort of like our defense at that time was just not at all right. And I'm sure we're gonna get on to like our like lineouts and all. Like our lineouts have taken a massive dip this season, and we, as I said, last season we really benefited from our maul tries, and it seemed like there was no fault to our sort of lineouts at all. But this year I think we really struggled with all aspects of the set piece. Lineouts have been dreadful to say the least sometimes, because when we used to like, you never really knew what you were going to get. It felt like this sort of Nigel Brady days towards the end of his career, where we would have had young Rob Herring on and then a Nigel Brady in around about 2012, 2011, where we just didn't really know how the lineouts were going to go without Johan Muller. But it seemed to have like as the season went on, went better. But as I say, like that first part of the season was bizarre. Losing against Edinburgh at home should never happen. Like I'm a big believer in like this. Ravenhill should be a place that people are afraid of. But we looked really fragile in those games, and then getting thumped by Bath, then beating Racing in a game that always seems to happen at Ravenhill, where we beat a big French team. We feel like we're on a high, and then the next week we struggled against Connacht. So we didn't have any real cohesion at all, and there was no sort of wow moments to be like, yes, this is the season getting started. It was always sort of like oh, we scraped past Deborah, we scraped past the Bulls, Connacht we lost, and then etc. etc. It just felt like a complete like game after game. There was sort of like yeah, we played well, but there was a big massive but, and it just didn't feel consistent, and it didn't. You saw that the players didn't really look like they were enjoying their rugby as well at the very start of the season. So it was an interesting one to say the least.
Yeah, there's interesting is certainly one way of putting it, I suppose. Peter's like similarly to Connacht, as we spoke about earlier in the series, like the wheels took a bit of a blow in that kind of second quarter, like the losses to Glasgow. The Glasgow one was just one of those, like a lot of teams losing Scots too, but the Edinburgh game just never got going. Like it really dampened the vibes, which, okay, maybe if comments are to be believed, previous or after the fact, the vibes weren't great in the first place. And like, even as they rounded off the first 9 games of the URC by beating Leinster, it didn't even feel like a big win at the time. It felt like just, okay, yeah, they got it done, but there was almost a sense of trepidation still there.
Yeah, I think what Adam says right, and just to touch on that line out point as well, in terms of them, I just want to sort of talk about the impact of Dwayne Vermeulen that we had in terms of our line out mauls, and that was our most potent attacking weapon, and that was plan A, and we didn't really have much of a plan B. And whenever Vermeulen went, his absence was really felt in terms of our line out mauls, and just in terms of his leadership as well. Tom Stewart, I think, a great player and fantastic potential, but always feel a bit safer when Rob Herring's on the pitch as well. So it's not always, as we all know, it's not always a hooker's fault. It's a team effort in terms of a line out maul and an effective line out. But Vermeulen's absence cannot be underrated in that regard. And like in terms of the results you're talking about there, yeah, I think I was talking to name drop alert. I was talking to Neil Best there during the week for my own pod, and we talked about maybe how the atmosphere has changed at Ravenhill over the years. And I remember certainly, and I'm not sure, Adam, you're a lot younger than me, I'm sure, but I remember growing up and watching every home game at Ravenhill, and look, it was a bit of a fortress, do you know? Teams, as you rightly say, teams, doesn't matter who they were, it could be a big French team, big Premiership team. You come over to Ravenhill, and it was a hostile, intimidating atmosphere. Usually muddy, wet, windy. Neil Best himself was saying like it was great whenever we played in those conditions because teams hated it. Everyone was miserable except Ulster. They relished that. We had a big, powerful, dominant pack. Quite a lot of sort of abrasive, aggressive players in there. And you think back, there's the likes of Roger Wilson, Neil Best, Stephen Ferris, those guys coming through. So look, I'm done reminiscing, but in terms of how that's changed now, those two results you mentioned, the Glasgow result, and then later on in the season, the Toulouse result as well. So both losses at home. Like Glasgow, there's no shame in losing to Glasgow. And we lost obviously away at Scotstoun Stadium as well. But the home loss to Toulouse was, if you take that as sort of a case study, that was really damaging to morale, I think, because not only did we lose, but we lost by such a margin. And actually, it was 24-48. So we got well and truly beaten. But even I think that was probably a bit flattering, because Toulouse ran away with it. And they looked such a class apart that I was slightly worried, because I think in this league, in the URC, and I love the URC, I think it's like, in many ways, it is getting more competitive, and anyone can beat anyone on their day. But you're really tested whenever you go into Europe, and you play the likes of Toulouse, and it exposes the weakness and the gap that there is in terms of just quality and class in your team. And so that worried me, because we've been scraping results, as you say. Look, at the beginning of the season, we're scraping results against the likes of Munster and fairness, we lost away to Connacht, but at that Edinburgh game that we lost at home. Sorry, that's the game I was referring to earlier. We lost at home, and then losing away to Glasgow. Those results, they were tight, and they probably give us that false sense of security. But then, just the loss to Toulouse, and then followed up in such quick succession by the Harlequins loss. It was just, in terms of getting the guys up after that, that's really hard to do, because whenever a coach has instilled his philosophy, which Dan McFarland had the chance to, our longest serving coach in the professional era, he had plenty of time to sort of instill his messaging in the players. And after a certain amount of time, if that's not working, players lose their confidence in the coach. It's very hard and he tried everything. We went through all the stages. You talk about 5 stages of grief. Well, it was sort of the 5 stages of a coach's demise, because it's sort of the hairdryer treatment, throwing the players under the bus, and then you end up sort of reversing a bit and saying, and the other thing he said was the guys aren't training properly around that time. And I sort of thought at the time, well, whose job is that done? To make sure that the guys train well. And like, if there's anything, I often refer back to football, and you think Sir Alex Ferguson, whenever he was coaching Man United, the last thing he would do is throw the players under the bus. He could do whatever he wanted in private. He could have a go at them in the changing rooms, but you never threw your players under the bus and say it's their fault for not training well. And almost self-preservation. I got that sense. Oh, it's not my fault, it's the players. Well, like, you can't sack the whole team. And in fairness to the team, I never got the sense there was a lack of effort. I thought they battled in those games. I just, as Adam said, there was no sense of cohesion. They weren't playing together. The game plan wasn't working. Our plan A wasn't working, in terms of sort of line out mauls in that forward dominant game. I think we just probably didn't have the personnel at the time. I think a lot of the guys who have ended the season so well hadn't come to the fore just yet. And that's because they're young guys, these guys that we'll be basing the team around in the next couple of seasons, and who will turn into the next generation of your Stephen Ferris's, your Neil Best, your Roger Wilson. I think we have the guys there, but they just weren't at that level yet. And I think they did need a new coach to come in. So look, in terms of those results, as you say, the Edinburgh loss at home and the Toulouse loss at home, those were the real kickers. And I think at that stage, the writing was on the wall for Dan. So yeah, that was the second part of the season.
And we're going to move on to talk about Europe anyway. You covered it all brilliantly, how it ties into, those losses fed into Europe, and then from Europe that kind of spiraled, and then obviously that Ospreys game is the culmination of Dan McFarland's era. Now, because we've covered it extensively on this podcast before, I don't want to touch too much on McFarland stepping aside. So I might just move on to the Challenge Cup for a minute while we're on Europe. And Adam, like, the way a lot of people framed it was, yeah, Richie Murphy took over the team about 2 weeks beforehand. Yes, they fell flat on French soil against Clermont, but it was probably a bit of a free hit. But the only question I'd ask is, can you accept it as a free hit and also have that regret about it? Because it was Montpellier who he brushed aside, but they finished 13th in the top 14. Clermont then wiped the floor with Ulster, but they haven't been great in the top 14 either. So is it a bit of regret still there, nonetheless?
In a way, no. I think it was a bridge too far. I think at the time you would have thought like it was a free hit, and then you sort of seen what happened at the rest of the Challenge Cup with the Sharks. Like with that Sharks Gloucester game, I think we would have put a good game against Gloucester, but the Sharks had all those South African all the Springboks back. To put a coach in any like if we would have had like for example Shirt Lancaster take over within 2 weeks, I wouldn't reckon he wouldn't have won that game in Claremont. Do you know what I mean? I think we needed time to just relax. I think I think our expectations were of course high, and we were so positive because of the change that I would say Richie, if he would have had the team this season, like we'll see in the preseason how that goes. But I would say if we would have had Richie, it would have been a free hit this season. If we would have kept Stan, possibly. But we had that sort of Challenge Cup run during COVID, and that fell flat on its arse as well. So there's like, as Peter said, like he tried so many ways to fix it, but it always just came down to the same sort of rugby that always got figured out in the end. Yeah, I don't see it as a free hit. I don't see it as a regret because it's sort of the impossible job. Like that Montpellier away, like I know that we're judging by top 14 standards, but Montpellier were dreadful against us. They were really bad. But Claremont away, we've won once there in the past how many years? It's still Claremont at home. I would say about Ravenhill being Ravenhill, but the Stade Michelin, that's one of those names that are synonymous with rugby. And we did get thumped by them, but I'd say that would sort of be a benchmark for Richie. That was a Richie settling in period. It was a honeymoon period, and his honeymoon period started with two away trips to South Africa, a trip to Newport. No, like staying in Newport, in Belfast for Newport, and then two Challenge Cup away games. Like that's rough going for any coach. So I wouldn't see that as a big regret at all, really.
Fair enough. And I suppose it is, I'm not going to say revisionist, but you can always say what it is the Challenge Cup. And if he didn't use that time to look at his squad, and Nathan Doak started that Claremont game at 10, as you might remember. If they didn't have that opportunity, maybe the game against Benetton or against Cardiff goes differently. And obviously they proved to be very important at the end of the season. And that's where we're going to jump back to now, is the URC, because I know we're kind of flying through this, but again, a lot of it has been covered as well. I just want to get your perspective on different chunks of the season. And after Dan McFarland's departure, Ulster did pick up momentum eventually. They had those 2 losses in South Africa, granted, but they picked up steam, assured themselves the Champions Cup rugby next season. And the huge result was, of course, that Leinster victory at home, courtesy of the John Cooney late penalty kick. Adam, that final block, that final 6, 7 games, whatever it may be, 6 games, you could say. What did you make of that? Knowing there was a new coaching staff in there, knowing some people would have written them out of the top 8 race, probably prematurely. But from your perspective, what was your take on it?
I think that Benetton game is incredibly important to this factor. I think the Benetton game they brought out their full team, and I'm never going to write Benetton off, because they used to be the whipping boys of the Pro 12 with Zebra. They used to be the ones that we were always like, there's a guaranteed couple of points against them always. And that Benetton game, when we won it, the relief I felt, and then the Scarlets game after, it just felt like we were building something really nice, which culminated in that game against Leinster. And even against Munster, I feel like that game against Leinster was with our full squad, like give or take, like Henderson and things like that. That's when we had our second rows. And then we started to lose our second rows. Eventually injuries caught up with us. And I would say, if like you can say like revisionist history and like what ifs, if we would have had our full sort of second row and our full our full pack ready to go against Leinster last weekend at the time of recording, we would have probably given them a better fight, but we still gave them a good fight. That Ulster Munster game, we gave a good fight as well. we played way more positively in these two losses at the end of the season than we did against, as you mentioned, Leinster at the RDS when we won. There was way more positive gameplay. We actually fought, which we lacked in February against the Ospreys. I felt like there was a bit more pride in the jersey when we were playing these last couple of games, which that's what we want as fans. We want to look over a game where, frankly, we were gutted to lose, but also given the season that we had, like, there's so many more positives to take from it than negatives, especially at the end of the season, and that's what Richie needed to do. As soon as he signed that 2-year contract, he basically needed to sort of inject the feeling back of Ulster being Ulster again, and also fighting sort of above our weight in terms of what we can do. Because when you look at it, our two NIQ signings, yours and Kitsoff, they were absent this year. Like, I must say, they were not the greatest of signings at all. When you look at the likes of how much Leinster used their NIQs, Munster used theirs, and Connacht as well, they rely on them so much. And it's probably an issue with the recruit. Well, it is an issue with the recruitment, but we went from a season going into the season going, we've signed a double World Cup winner. We've signed Ewers, who's like a proven Champions Cup / Premiership worthy back rower. And they've came in and they really did nothing of note. There was no sort of big game from them, I felt. And we basically had to build from there. And having Kitsoff leave mid-season was a weird end to his tenure as like the 5-month wonder that he was for us. And, you know, he played a couple of games for us. He wasn't that big sort of impact that we needed. Was it because our back, like our forward pack was slightly underweight? Possibly, but you can see the likes of
Probably wasn't the right signing in some ways. Like, he's a scrum first, rock solid loose head prop, as opposed to, say, you know, Oxen J came into my mind, but he's the wrong example in South Africa. But say Thomas Dechoy, who's kind of a more all-rounded prop. That's probably what Ulster needed more than Kitsoff.
We were looking for like a John Afoa rather than a Tom Court. I would say sort of like the perfect Ulster analogy to put to it.
That's British and Irish Lion tourist Tom Court to you, remember?
Oh yeah, to be fair, like that's so great. I love that. It's one of my favorite nuggets of information about Ulster history. Tom Court's a lion. But yeah, we were looking for more of like a more expansive prop, and we ironically found that in Scott Wilson. Because what game did he debut? But he kind of just came
Munster.
off the bench.
Don't remind me, Munster.
Oh yeah, well yeah, he played against Munster, but like he was supposed to play an AIL game, and then he came on that weekend and just played an absolute blinder. I'd rather find players like that at the minute, given the financial troubles. And to be fair, I say this a lot on Twitter, but I would love it when the young players play with Richie, because you see the way that Izuchukwu's playing, you see the way that McCann's playing. They're playing so nicely. And when you think about Richie's like past with under-20s rugby, he would have like a season with an under-20s player. He would have like a season or two at most. He can build a team within a season or two and to win a double Grand Slam. So I would love the fact that the positive mindset is that he would have a preseason with Ulster, inject ideas. We're getting a new forwards coach in, so we'd have 2 forwards coaches in. We'll see how that works in terms of set piece. But, you know, I'd say there's way more positives out of the losses at the end of the season. And there's certainly way more positives from the wins. But then the wins and the losses at the very start, where it felt stale and it was really uninspired, rather than this right at the tail end of the season where we started to peak, but the injuries eventually caught up to us.
Yeah, and it's a good point you mentioned about Richie's. I think it's more style of coaching insofar as he finds players and what role would suit them and go from there, as opposed to, say, Jan McFarland, where he had what he wanted. And it was sometimes it did feel like square pegs and round holes with Ulster, especially in that pack. It often felt like that. So I think that's a difference. And you've seen Izuchukwu and Sheridan push on have really good ends to the season. Dave McCann, as we mentioned, again, having been injured, having a really strong end to the season as well. And just to wrap up the season, Peter, it was Ulster did not beat themselves, actually. It was Leinster who defeated Ulster in the URC quarter-final. And like, to some degree, it was the injury bug that halted things as well. And like Adam mentioned it, there's probably more positive than negative to take from those final weeks.
Yeah, I think depth is an issue, and you touched on the signings there, Adam, and I think having been more shrewd in terms of recruitment over the summer, we would have had a bit of depth. I think I'm a big fan of, and so Ulster have really set their stall out in that they're going to play with young homegrown players, but what you need to do to compete at this level, particularly with the likes of Leinster, because of the disparity in resources that they have, when compared to the likes of lowly Ulster, who haven't helped themselves by, or rather, a previous CEO didn't help us by butchering our sort of accounts. It meant that we couldn't bring in certain players, or the players that we did have were not the right ones. It just wasn't shrewd. So I completely agree with your points about Kitsoff. Actually, I was very excited because he's a world-class player. And I think like if you have the ability and you have the finances to sign a world-class player and they're willing to come, great. He is not the profile of player that we needed. Completely agree with that. That has changed over the years at Ulster. And sorry, you can touch on the Leinster game in a moment, but I just want to talk a wee bit about recruitment because, again, I was speaking to an ex-player who was saying he came to Ulster because they had, this is years ago, he said, look, they wanted a player of his profile. And they wanted that for a couple of seasons. They'd scouted him and they brought him over and said, this is the role that we need you to perform. And it was all very well thought out. Whereas the recruitment policy is a bit like, these days seems to be a bit like who's available, who's a big name that we've all heard of. It's a bit like sort of a 12-year-old on FIFA playing career mode. It's like, I've heard of him. He won the World Cup. Let's get him. And look, in fairness, and so that was Kitsoff. Like it didn't work out, and mistakes happen. Dave Ewers was an interesting one. I thought he was a great signing, shrewd, experienced, powerful ball carrier, powerful in defence. For whatever reason, it just didn't work out for him, and it was quite telling that it was Greg Jones came off the bench against Leinster, not Dave Ewers. So I think that says it all in that regard. But like in terms of that game, I think what we needed to do, and they did this actually in the first 20 minutes, was frustrate Leinster, play the rugby in their territory. We put a lot of pressure on them. And look, in that sense, you couldn't fault them for effort. And look, I was proud watching what they did. We're playing against the real Leinster this time, and rather than like, let's face it, and I was going on about we're going to do the hat trick over them, but it's slightly different beating their sort of second or third team, and that's not to be sniffed at. Like it's Leinster at the end of the day, they have a conveyor belt of talent and so many good players that like beating any form of Leinster is great, but like we're up against what is effectively the Ireland team here, and what I suppose what I was looking for was in terms of the individual battles. I wanted to see some of those young guys that we've talked about already really putting their hand up and saying, like, you're the incumbent, you're the Ireland guy, I'm the next generation, and I'm going to let you know who I am here. So that's the likes of, I suppose, you've got Sheridan, you've got Izzy, you've got Dave McCann. All those guys, I think, will get caps for Ireland. I don't think that's all that controversial a thing to say, and I think it was an opportunity for them to set their stall out. Now, just circumstances were that like Izzy went off quite early, and that actually had a big impact on us because he's a point of difference now, and he's really kicked on in that regard. Like he's become, within a couple of months, he's become a really important player for us in terms of giving us go forward ball. Something that we've lacked a wee bit is powerful ball carriers. Like in terms of what Richie Murphy has brought with him, looking through some of the stats, the sort of comparative stats, and we've seen some improvement. Now it's not night and day by any means, but we've seen more entries into opposition 22s. We've seen more carries, but not necessarily seeing a huge amount more return from those carries. Our territory where we're playing rugby's better. Offloads have increased as well. All of this paints a picture of a team playing with a bit of confidence. And that's what I wanted to see. And we saw it against Munster, where we narrowly lost that game. Again, a very difficult place to go, unfortunately, down at Thomond. But in this game, I wanted to see a battle, and we got that, and we saw the guys stick their hands up. So I think most real Ulster fans will watch that and go, and not look at the result and the outcome and judge it by that, but by the effort and the performance. And I think we can be proud of that. And I was certainly proud watching it. And I think the sense was, like, if this goes well, we can all be excited for next year, and we'll come to talk about through the next season as well. But that was my takeaway from the game, that we're playing against a team, and I would have liked to see us maybe target a wee bit more. I think Ross Burns maybe a bit of a weak link in that Leinster team. If I were Leinster, I'd just be playing Prendergast. I don't understand. And I know he came on, but I would like to see him start more, just from an Ireland perspective as well, just to see how he gets on and throw him in. And I think he certainly doesn't weaken the team. I think he gives them a bit of an X factor, which Ross Burns certainly lacks. But yeah, I was happy with the finish to the season, to be honest with you. And maybe that shows a lack of ambition on my part, but I just think, yeah, that crop of youngsters did put their hands up.
Yeah, no, I think we can agree there. And you did mention next season. That's what I want to finish on really quickly before we go. There's areas the Ulster need to improve on. There's, key players, all the things like that. Peter, I'll start with yourself. In terms of where you feel Ulster need to improve going into next season, be it consistency, tactically, whatever it might be, style of play, where would you be looking at when the season rolls around in September?
Well, I think the big area will be 10. I think that'll be absolutely key. And actually, 10 and probably 7, and finding a dedicated 7. And people might be listening and shouting, Dave McCann, he's right there. And of course, Dave McCann will start as many games as humanly possible. Personally, I see him as more of a 6. In terms of a disruptor, and coming back to the Leinster game, we need someone who can frustrate, disrupt, and be an absolute nuisance at the breakdown. Marcus Ray, on a good day, can do that really well. And people underrate the importance of a really good 7, but I think that's what we need. Whether that's Sean Reffel, whether it's Ruben Crothers, who's tore up trees for the Ireland under-20s, but and has played well when he's played for Ireland, but we need someone to nail down that 7 jersey. And we'll see some combination of Dave McCann, Nick Timoney, and another. I see Harry Sheridan going between second row and back row as needed, but then getting, as I say, the likes of Crothers or Sean Raffel in and being a real disruptor. It would bring real balance to our back row. In terms of 10, that's the other area that we'll wait and see what happens. Now, they've signed this guy, Aidan Morgan, and like anyone who's a very dedicated rugby fan may have watched his relatively small number of performances in New Zealand, but I'll hold my hands up and say I haven't seen a huge amount apart from his highlight reel, and like even I could look good on a highlight reel. Maybe not that good that far, but Aidan Morgan certainly looks like he is a running out half. He has the capacity to break a line, offload, looks pretty skillful. Whether, again, that's exactly what we need, I don't know. I'd love an out half with a massive boot who can play for territory. It's probably something Billy Burns lacked at times. So Billy Burns had his qualities. I was a big fan of his. And in terms of his crossfield kicks and his delicate chips over the top and things like that, I thought he brought that extra dimension to our game. But I'd love a 10 who can just wall up the ball and get us some 50-22s, which again, it's not a huge part of the game. And just playing, it causes chaos. If you've got someone playing at 10 who can wall up the ball in a tactical way, find gaps in the back three, then like you're absolutely flying. So Ian Morgan and how he gets on will be massive. Like in terms of generally, in terms of we might come to this a wee bit more, but in terms of generally how they can improve, like it will be exploiting our backs, and something which Dan McFarland was frequently criticised, or rather the coaching team under Dan McFarland were criticised for. We had this set of electric backs and we weren't using them. Now part of that, and a large part of that, is due to the fact that it just wasn't the style of rugby we're playing. There's a lot coming off of 9, so either Nathan Doak or John Cooney were box kicking a lot. We didn't see a great rate of return for those box kicks at times, and Ulster team since the days of Ruan Pinar who've played predominantly from 9, and probably relieves a wee bit of pressure from the out half, but yeah, it doesn't always lend itself to great running rugby, and I'd love to see the likes of whenever James Hume is back in the team, Mike Lowry, Postlethwaite, and then Stockdale. Again, I haven't talked a huge amount about Stockdale. He's recovered some form, which is great to see. There's you can see wee bits and pieces, glimpses of his sort of X factor that he has coming back, and Robert Balakoon. Part of the issue with both of them, in particular Balakoon, is I think he needs to go looking for the ball a wee bit more. Now, he may well have been told to stand out in the cold on the wing by himself, but I doubt it. I think he needs to reinvent himself slightly more. He reminds me of sort of a young Tommy Bowe. Tommy Bowe was never shy of picking a line, coming in and taking a really good line through the defence. And certainly for Leinster, the likes of James Lowe's fantastic at that as well, and Mac Hansen a wee bit as well for Connacht. They're both guys who go searching for the ball, and so if they're going to play for Ireland, both of those guys, that's the type of player Andy Farrell is after. And I suppose the provincial system that we have, that's what they need to aspire to, and that's the way that they need to play if they hope to get international recognition. So yeah, I think those sort of 3 things. So getting a really good 7 nailed down. Maybe it could be Dave McCann. I don't think he's a groundhog particularly. He has so many other qualities. Great line-out operator, fantastic engine around the pitch. He can carry, can play across the back row, but I think you need a dedicated 7. You need a 10. And that may be Aidan Morgan. That's less tactical. That's more personnel related. Is he going to be good? Fingers crossed. And we'll back him all the way. And on that point, like if he's not good immediately, you have to stick with them and give him a bit of time, because coming up to Ulster, it will be difficult for him. It's different conditions. Although apparently, I think he's based in Wellington before. Apparently, it's very similar conditions to Belfast. I think it's fairly wet and miserable a lot of the time. So he'll be well used to that. But yeah, getting those guys, and part of his responsibility will be getting the back line ticking as well. But I trust in Richie that he'll recognise and exploit our set of electric backs a bit more than we had previously.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, before we go, I'm going to give you a player or two that you are looking forward to seeing. I know you could go through about 40 of them, but if you're limited to 1 or 2, which way are you leaning?
Is it Chuku? And after his big barnstorming season, is one of them, and I'm quite excited to see. I'm a very big fan of Stuart Moore, and I reckon that he is a fullback. I don't know if that's one of the controversial opinions of an Ulster rugby fan, or as a provincial, as an Ireland fan as well. I reckon he will do a tidy job at fullback for Ireland. I feel like that's one of those ones in conversation. And
I think I'm just going to put in there, I think he's better than probably the last two lads who've played fullback for Ireland in terms of playing fullback.
Yeah, well,
You know,
Frawley and Larmour.
Larmour.
Yeah. He's much more of a fullback than them. He's much more of a rounded game player. But I think he's kind of struggled with the high ball against Leinster, but that's against a world-class back three. I think just, I think also I'm quite excited / slightly terrified. Peter picked on it. The battle for 10. Who's going to be 10 by the end of the season? Because at one point we were going to get Aaron Cruden, which was like such a random like the fact that Aaron Cruden said no to us saved us basically. I reckon from more financial turmoil, but I'm excited. But as Peter said, like a good highlight package that Aidan Morgan has. I'll bring up one quick example of a package. Sam Windsor, when he signed for us, his highlight package was amazing. And then his first game against us, first game for us, he missed touch against Newport off a punt about 3 or 4 times. So, there's like, you have to take those highlight packages with a pinch of salt. Arno Botha, when we signed him, it was just him in the gym and he looked like he was ready. And then he got injured and he wasn't. So like, you have to really take these with a pinch of salt. But yeah, I'm excited for the Battle of 10, Izuchuku and Stuart Moore and the development of him. And also that returning Jacob Stockdale with a smile back on his face because he's lost that over the past few years. But he's finally starting to get that back. And that's what Ireland need is a deadly Jacob Stockdale because, we need that sort of attacking edge for both teams. I reckon just the out of nowhere and unpredictability of him. Because he was even intercepting balls at the end of the season and scoring tries, and it's like we need that. That 2018 like season like is stuff of dreams, and we just need that back. And I reckon he's going to get there.
I'm not sure if I'd have Winger as high on the kind of panic scale for Ireland as other people do. I'd be fairly comfortable with a lot of them. So, but it is good to see Jacob back in form. I'm a big Jacob Stockdale fan, and on a personal level, it is good to see him back. And we started with positives, we finished with positives. So I think we've done exactly what we set out to do. Probably ran a little bit over time, but it has been a really busy season for Ulster. So I think I can allow it, especially in this instance. Thank you very much to Adam and to Peter for coming on this evening, and to everyone at home for listening. We'll have, of course, the season reviews of all 4 provinces: Ulster, Connacht, Munster, and Leinster this week. The Munster one in conjunction with the Red Army podcast, before switching it up and switching attention to Ireland's summer tour of South Africa. The season that never finishes, just refuses to finish. I think we need a break now at this stage, if I'm being quite honest. If you do like to see or hear, please stay tuned for those season reviews of the other provinces and for the July test. And to catch up on all the stuff, please do subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment or two. You can find all my social medias down below. But for now, and until next time, take it easy.